It is a loaded question.
Let's talk about it. Father Padre, winding
That's
down with Padre.
who's Father Padre?
I don't know.
That's
Why do I want to
pretty
say
neat.
father? It's continuously.
Why is it so hard for you to ever get this right? Welcome to Winding Down with Padre. My
Okay,
name is Father
let's
White.
practice you starting.
Okay.
That was it. That was you actually doing it.
Yeah,
Okay,
I was
let's
gonna do it.
Good. Make it official.
Okay. Well, welcome. You're not gonna jump in?
No.
Welcome to Winding Down with Padre. My name is Father White,
And I'm Father Michael.
and we are talking about our second non-negotiable tonight.
Whew, man, last week was intense.
Oh, look, I'm banging on the table. My
That's
bad.
okay. Hey,
Last
you
week,
do what you gotta do.
I thought last week was going to be our most controversial topic, so I was kind of relieved whenever we were
Yeah.
finished. And then I realized, oh my goodness, I underestimated. This week, I'm pretty sure, is the most controversial topic. Even though it's the second non-negotiable, I just feel like this is even more sticky.
Well, yeah, well, because I think last week, protect life, uphold the dignity of life. It's like, yeah, we all do that, but it's kind of vague when it can be vague when it comes to application.
I think it's
Maybe.
because our viewers, we know most of our viewers were probably agreeing with this. Whereas this one, I think most of our viewers are still going to want to agree, but we might say some things that might challenge some of our viewers. And so this one is just going to be a little bit more sticky.
Love that. What are we drinking?
We are drinking
Not that
Robert Mondavi.
Robert Mondavi. We could change it up a little white.
We
this
changed it
time.
up. It's this time
No
it's
Chard.
white. I gotta be honest, it's not
Chardonnay.
my favorite because I like red better. But you know what? For a Chardonnay, I'll drink it.
Yeah, I think it was a Wine Down with Padre sponsor.
Yeah. Well, thank you to the sponsor because I still like it, even though it's white.
So just a quick check in. How's the beard working for you?
It's growing on me.
Has that gotten old yet?
Not old yet.
Okay. It it looks good. I think I told you that. I'm not sure if I told you that on the screen.
When you
but
growing yours?
don't you
huh?
think it looks good?
Oh, Father
You
Mike
know-
gonna grow a beard.
There's potential. There's potential. You know, there's this like One Heart campaign we got going on, and
Oh goodness, let's not even go
one
there.
of my
We don't need
one
a
of my
second
one of my
controversial
thoughts
topic.
is just to make it look absolutely hideous.
Okay,
and just like grow out a beard and be like
Well, that's
wood
going
man.
really going to be something.
Yeah, but hey, it remains to be seen. Stay tuned.
Why don't we recap just
Please,
for our
God.
viewers just quickly where we've been? So this year, if you're joining us for the first time, we have done 2 episodes already. The first episode was some foundational principles, and then the second episode was our first non-negotiable, which was the dignity of every human life. If you want to catch up on those episodes, you can go to our videos tab on our Facebook page, and you can see the playlist there for Church and State. But today we're on our second non-negotiable. And where does this come from, this language of non-negotiable? Sounds kind of harsh.
Yeah, it was the quote we used last time from Pope Benedict. Pope Benedict was trying to guide the Universal Church in how to vote, and this idea of engaging our Christianity, our practice of religion, to influence the culture in which we live. And so one of the main ways we do that is we elect officials who uphold the Christian worldview, the Christian lens, so to speak, on how to see life. And so the idea is if there are some non-negotiables as we look to electing officials from our Christian values that will guide our voting. So there's some non-negotiables, and then there's some negotiables that we'll talk about.
Negotiables being things that good Catholics could potentially disagree
Right,
on.
just a matter. It's not a matter of principle; it's a matter of policy, how you implement them. We're talking about principles.
Talking about principles. And we're talking about some very fundamental principles. And like we mentioned, the dignity of the human person was last week, the first non-negotiable. So this week, what we're talking about is the dignity of marriage and family. And that being the second non-negotiable articulated by Pope Benedict. And this also includes the education of our children. So this topic is definitely one that at least is relevant for everybody because we all have a family.
Yeah, and it may look different, but we do have one, and we all definitely have a mother.
Yes,
I've been
and a
privileged
father.
to have a beautiful mom and dad that was born and raised. We still have a healthy family and two sisters, and so just value of human family is definitely important, at least in the home I was raised. But I know that we all come from different homes, and so our conversation may hit the people listening in a different way.
Yeah, and at first instance, you may think, well, that's kind of sweet, so maybe that's not too controversial. But it gets controversial whenever we start defining the family and what we actually mean by promoting and supporting the definition of marriage that we believe in.
Sure.
So,
Let's get right to it.
well, yeah, I mean, I want to start with the USCCB um, reminding us that they have this document called "Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship," and we'll provide the link. But they kind of go into a little bit of the deeper issues and kind of summarize for us how to go about them. A lot of people don't realize the church does say a lot about politics and a lot about voting, and we talk about again the principles. Well, they say this in paragraph 46. The human person is not only sacred, but also social. So we talked about the sacredness of human person last week with pro-life discussions. But they're not only sacred, they're also social. And full human development takes place in relationship with others. And the primary place, the first place where we experience those relationships is in the family. And so it's the family that is the fundamental building block of society. So society is really made up of a bunch of families. That's what society is. So we have to define what is this family. What is the best way to do it? So do you want to define for us?
Yeah, I mean, I have the quote that USCCB put out, but I know you've succinct it into kind of three main points. So maybe I'll say the quote and then just what USCCB defines marriage is. It says, marriage must be defined, recognized, and protected as a lifelong, exclusive commitment between a man and a woman, and as a source of the next generation and protection of children. So a safe, protective haven for children. So so just a definition there, but I know you've broken down in like three key
Well,
points.
from that definition, that comes from paragraph 70 of the same document. Our bishops is articulating the teachings of the church and really the teachings of human experience in Christians throughout the centuries, that marriage is defined as lifelong between man and woman and procreative of children. Those are three essential pieces to the marriage that we believe in. And you know, some people may say, well, that's so archaic. You know, like we're kind of past that, you know. And I just want to reverence right away before we even enter into any further discussion that, yes, this is a very sacred conversation. We're definitely, we realize that that some people may have had a different experience of marriage or maybe currently experiencing a different experience of marriage. So definitely on holy ground here, and we want to keep that in mind, be very sensitive as we move forward. But our teaching of what marriage is comes to us from the very first pages of the Bible.
Sure. You know, we have this great gift. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of the theology of the body. Pope John Paul II offered the church this great wisdom in late 70s, 80s, and 90s. His reflections looking at Genesis and looking at God's original vision and intent for our humanity, like the way we're made, our design. And he reflected on marriage. So he looked at our human sexuality and looked at the way God designed us, and basically gives us some beautiful reflection on the beauty and dignity of marriage, and why it's so important to uphold the beauty and dignity of marriage, and in our home life and what that fosters. But primarily, he goes back to Genesis, right? Chapters 1 and 2, and it says God. What it means is, like, the man was created in the image and likeness of God, but he doesn't fully communicate all of God and God's characteristics. Actually, when you look at man and woman together, so there's something about the woman, there's something about the feminine that reflects who God is and who God is towards us. And so both man and woman complement and fully reveal who God is. And so, like, his reflection talks about how in marriage, marriage is the beautiful complementarity of the man and the woman coming together and loving each other and creating a home and sacrificing and showing the world what love looks like.
Which would be an image of God Himself. So,
Right.
so marriage being that tangible image of God and of His love for us.
Right. Yeah, and part of that is the ability to co-create life. So there's this image of man and woman actually create life along with God. So they're partners
Co-creators.
living out the way that they are created to be with God.
Which shows us that love is life-giving, that love is generous, it's outpouring.
Right.
Which is exactly how God is, so it makes sense that marriage would reflect that. And part of that too, part of what makes that possible is that man is incomplete without woman, and woman is incomplete without man. It's written in the language of our bodies. And marriage is that great sacrament where the two become one, and there is that experience, that sign of completion, of which we'll fully experience when we're in heaven
Sure.
with God.
So that's kind of what the church communicates, upholds, protects when we talk about marriage. Just this institution, lifelong institution between man and woman that is for the procreation of children and education of them about just their origin, their purpose.
Yeah,
their design.
and the fact that the parents are the primary educators of their children, it's their responsibility first before anyone else, even before the church, even before the priest, and even before the teachers. Like the parents are the ones, the primary first responsible parties to educate their children.
Sure.
That's a fundamental right that they have due to the very fact of what marriage and family is.
Right.
Which is beautiful. I mean, all of this just speaks to the great beauty and the dignity of marriage because ultimately it is reflecting God,
Right.
just as the human person reflects God. And that is why this is a non-negotiable, because we're talking about creation, like we're talking about God Himself and the way that He created us. We can't really change that. That's a truth that we have received
Sure.
from Him. But there's a lot at stake.
There is. And basically, as we said at the beginning, as we vote on elected officials, we know that those elected officials will be forming policy, they will be implementing policy. And so we want to elect officials who, through their lens, are forming a culture that will protect and uphold the dignity of the family as the church defines it. So as a Christian voter, I want to get to know the elected officials that are up for election. I want to know, how do they see the world? What do they stand for? What's their platform? So that they could make laws and implement policies.
Exactly. I just want to read this quote again from paragraph 70 of the Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenships from the bishops, that they say that the family being the fundamental cell of human society, the role and responsibilities and needs of families should be central to national policies. What they're saying is every policy in the nation should support and enhance family life rather than take it away. So when we vote for officials that will be making laws, officials that will be signing executive orders, and officials who will be appointing judges to interpret the Constitution through a particular lens. So there's a lot at stake on the way in which we make the definition of marriage and family life either central or to the wayside in our national policies and even local policies.
Sure, and you mentioned there's a lot at stake. So, yeah, can you say a little more about like what is at stake and what might we just become aware of as perhaps there are trends to uphold the family as we have defined it, and trends to maybe redefine marriage, which obviously changes our culture.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's first of all, I like that you brought up culture, because our laws influence the way in which we live our lives. It influences our habits and our beliefs, and ultimately our culture. In our culture, there's something about our culture that's very powerful. There's a pedagogy about it. It teaches us how to have in these beliefs and how to see things from a particular perspective. very often parents feel like they lose control of teaching their kids because the culture is teaching them something a lot more effectively. So what is at stake? Well, the definition of marriage, and whenever we talk about same-sex unions, that becomes a very sensitive topic. And again, before we go any further, I just have to reverence the difficulty and the sensitivity of this conversation. I know that you and I both have family members that are kind of in this situation. So,
And probably everyone listening
perhaps
knows someone, or has someone in their family that that experiences same-sex attraction, that is either in civil same-sex unions, or is
yeah,
involved in this in one way, a coworker or something.
yeah, and perhaps some of them may even be watching. And so, again, it's so important that we as a church proclaim, yes, we love these people and we love everybody. But sometimes love is challenging, and sometimes in our love, we still have to hold fast to the truth, and the truth that we have received from God and in our tradition and Scripture, is that marriage is defined a particular way. And so what's at stake here is that part of the reason that this is even a conversation is because our culture has come to this point where so many people are celebrating same-sex unions and encouraging it, which is causing perhaps some people to start maybe looking into it and maybe being okay with it and maybe not really thinking twice about the dignity of the way that marriage has been instituted. And so we're stepping away from what God has told us marriage is to be. Um, but as this becomes more and more part of the culture, and once it becomes more and more ingrained into our laws, well, then it starts to get into our education systems, and then our children grow up and think nothing of it. And there's just a lot of little pieces of forward steps that eventually start to have big ramifications on all of us in our daily life. So to there is a responsibility for all of us to really put the family as a non-negotiable national policy that we want to define, promote, and protect the dignity of the family as something that's possible to be lived as forever man and woman and procreated and education of children.
Yeah, and just to say again, I mean, like the LGBT community, there is such a place. There is a place for them in the church, to be loved, to receive community. But at the same time, like the message of the church has been clear and consistent that in the church's attempt to love us, the church is going to challenge us to see ourselves as God sees us in the way that God designed us. And that can often be challenging for anyone, heterosexual, homosexual, those who are promiscuous in any facet,
Mm-hmm.
whether they're, just sexually active outside of marriage.
Sure, there's so much more we could say, and honestly, we could do a whole series on just this, and that it's a very sensitive topic, and maybe we will in the future.
Sure.
But maybe just to give you all a resource, I came across this book called Made This Way, and it's by Trent Horn and Layla Miller. And what they do, it says how to prepare kids to face today's toughest moral issues. And they go through a lot of these challenging questions: same-sex marriage, transgender identity, and premarital sex even. All of these big questions, and they go through each one, and they start off with, what does the church teach? But then they say, how do we explain this to little kids? And then how do we explain this to big kids? Which is just incredible. Like, what a wonderful resource to, like, it's two parents that are very well educated that have articulated through their experience. This is how I've effectively explained these challenging issues to little kids and big kids, and even adults, whether you're a little kid or a big kid or not. If you're an adult, you can still benefit from, okay, how can I make sense of these really challenging teachings? But nonetheless, there may be a time where we can kind of dive
Absolutely.
deeper. But ultimately, what's at stake is that we uh, our politics influences our culture, and our culture influences our habits and beliefs in the way, and really our freedoms. And so, just in the same way that we are going to love a woman who has had an abortion and still love her as much as we can, but still like challenge her not to do that again. We're going to do the same thing with those that are in same-sex unions. We're going to love them, but challenge them to uphold the dignity of marriage
Yeah.
and family.
And this has like practical ramifications, right? So you were sharing, we were talking about this before we started recording, how there are some laws coming up. There are constantly laws coming up that we're going to be voting on, especially in November. We're going to be voting on some laws that have to do with upholding family,
Right.
and just like changing our constitution and its interpretation. And there has been some laws that maybe are affecting us now.
Sure. I guess just to give a little bit of background, most of you will probably remember in 2015 the Supreme Court case, Obergefell versus Hodges, where the Supreme Court voted 5-4 that the that same-sex unions would be considered marriage, and that gay couples could receive marriage licenses in every state in the United States. And so that now became a right in our Constitution. Well, before that case was declared, there were 30 states in the United States that in their state constitutions, and Louisiana was one of them, in their state constitutions, they had a little amendment that that basically defined marriage as man and woman. Well, okay, because the Supreme Court is higher than state courts, the Obergefell case, takes precedence. But all of those 30 states still have that constitutional clause, provision, where they still define man and woman as the marriage, even though they can't really enforce it. Well, this November, Nevada is going to be the first of those 30 states to ask their citizens to repeal that in their state constitution, which, although may not have any visible ramifications right away, it is another step in that direction of pushing the culture forward, of redefining the family. And as we redefine the family, just want to read this quote one more time from the USCCB, paragraph 46. They say that the family, being the first and fundamental unit of society, is a sanctuary for the creation and nurturing of children. It should be defended and strengthened, not redefined, undermined, or further distorted. And the Obergefell case did, in fact, redefine marriage for our nation.
Yeah.
And Nevada's up for that right now. Another one is Washington.
Yeah, and without missing it, even like our Pope Francis, our present Pope,
sure.
just kind of underlines and supports what you just said. In 2014, in his address on the complementarity between men and women, he said, children have a right to grow up in a family with a father and a mother, capable of creating a suitable environment for the child's development and emotional maturity. So, like,
That's a bold statement.
it is.
So
it is.
Just
like,
in case someone missed that, Pope Francis
I just
is saying that every child has a right to be raised by a mom and a dad.
Right.
Now, that's not always the case.
Right.
But that is certainly what we want to promote.
Yeah, and we're progressing our conversation from last week to this week, right? Uphold the human dignity. So children should have rights. Even unborn children who are in the womb should have rights to have access to life, to live. And then we're talking about the culture, like the society in which they live in. They should have a right to have a mother and a father, and to be raised with good human development, emotional maturity. So it's just so. I find it strange. Like I didn't grow up in my parents' time or my grandparents' time. I just feel like if they would have read this statement, it would have been okay. Like that sounds normal. Why did he feel a need to say that? Yeah. However, just saying it now in our cultural time,
honestly, is a dangerous thing to say.
It sounds challenging. Like, oh,
it sounds outdated. It sounds ignorant and just kind of misinformed. but it is it's a challenging statement that upholds the dignity of what marriage and family is. So yeah, another case that's our law that's going to be voted on this November in the state of Washington. They are it's a law that is proposing to where they would require that all public schools are going to provide a comprehensive sex education to all students starting in kindergarten all the way to 12th grade. And this comprehensive sex education is going to be decided upon by the superintendent. And the districts, the school boards, and the parents will not have any say on whether or not their children can participate in this or not. It will be a law required by the state. This goes back to the education of children. Parents should have an ability to decide what their children, their educational needs are, and that's
so
being
we're
taken away through this
redefining the
law.
the science books, the human sexuality.
Yeah, and even and also to mention that the sex education is also connected back to last week's video, the pro-life and pro-choice discussion. We know that Planned Parenthood is very much pro-choice, and Planned Parenthood turns out to be a big proponent of this particular law in Washington because they were very influential in creating this sex education program. So again, imagine a parent who's pro-life and doesn't want their kindergartner to get confused. Now they can't even do anything about it if they're going to send their kids to public school. So that's up for vote in Washington.
So a lot is at stake. I mean, our vote matters, and I really want to encourage those of you who are watching just to vote, to form your conscience and to get out there and vote. It's our civic responsibility to form culture, and that's why we're having these videos, right?
And to think critically as you vote, to really do your research on both the laws that are up for proposition and the candidates. Again, if we're going to vote for a candidate, we need to, this one might be a little bit more subtle, but we need to listen to the candidates and figure out what is their definition of marriage and what do they believe to be the rights of the family, because that's going to influence just about every policy they make, including the economy and healthcare and all the other things. So we need to know how do they feel about the family.
Yeah.
As we're talking about particular cases, there is one that's up for Louisiana that really applies to last week's video, but since we didn't bring it up, I think now would be a good time. On November 3rd, so the same day that we're going to vote for our president, in Louisiana, there's what's called the Love Life Amendment. And that is a proposition to have an amendment in our Constitution, our Louisiana Constitution, that would say that that the Supreme Court cannot make it a right to have an abortion or a right to fund it by taxpayer dollars. Now, we do know that abortion is allowed because of Roe v. Wade. However, it's not a right at this point. And this amendment that we're voting on, we want to vote yes on the amendment because the amendment says that it will not be a right. So in other words, to make it simple, to vote pro-life for this particular amendment in Louisiana, we would vote yes to number 1 on the ballot.
Yeah, good info.
So you can find out more information by going to lovelifevoteyes.com if you want more on that particular amendment in November.
I tell you, these discussions have certainly challenged me. I am going to scrutinize my vote more now than ever. Like, I'm really going to do my homework to read about the candidate, to read about
and
the
just
issues.
To show too, like obviously the President of the United States is a huge thing to consider, but an incredibly important piece to consider. But when you go to the ballot, there's going to be other things you're voting on.
Yep.
So make sure you're prepared. You know, we're also voting for other officials and other amendments and laws.
Yeah, the amendments, they sneak up.
So and if you don't do your research, then in the heat of the moment, you might just choose one, and they have big ramifications. So this is all very connected to our responsibility as faithful citizens and Christians.
So next week, what do we have another non-negotiable? I mean,
We do. We have another non-negotiable, and that is
might have to
going.
bring the bourbon out for that one or something.
Oh, what could we call it? It wouldn't be winding down. It
Oh,
would be burning down. Wait, that's not gonna work.
You're right.
Oh
We have to
man, we
stick to
didn't even
wine.
laugh a lot this time.
Oh, so serious.
It's a heavy topic,
Golly.
but you know what? It's an important one. So.
It started with my beard and it went downhill.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
I can't wait for you to grow it.
It's not growing on me.
Okay, next week we're going to talk about the third and final non-negotiable.
Oh,
And then after that, we'll get on to the negotiables, and that's going to be real fun. 'cause
Yes.
then two Catholics can actually disagree.
oh.
But next week, we're talking about our final non-negotiable. Should we tell them? What do you think?
I don't know. I kind of like the suspense.
Okay, there's one more. You'll find out next week.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Have a good night.